So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Beate Warnig, and I'm very much welcome you to this workshop about effective use of Horizon 2020 Preparatory Phase funding. Let me shortly introduce myself. I'm from the German Aerospace Center, the DLR, and I'm coordinating Work Package 4 of an EU-funded project called Stress-Free, under which banner we are organizing today this workshop. And I thank you very much, the European Commission, that we are able to organize such workshops. I take the opportunity as well to thank the Austrian Ministry for hosting the event in this beautiful premises. Nevertheless, it's beautiful, but it's huge, and this makes it happen that even some of our speakers have not arrived yet. So we will try to be a bit more flexible and to shift a bit the panels if in case we need it. So Stress-Free stands for Support to Reinforce the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructures. And the overall objective of the workshop of today is to exchange your experience and best practice with ESFRI project and landmarks, who are the senior project in research infrastructures of ESFRI, then together with ESFRI members, of course the European Commission and experts of other EU projects. We hope you will find suitable solution for the specific challenge you are faced with, so that you are able to advance your European research infrastructure into implementation. Just let me give a short overview of this of the procedure of this day. So first we will have 2 speeches, then we will have 3 panels, and as we are running a bit out of time, we will ask to be very short, perhaps in the questions in between the panels, but we will have a 1-hour session for answers and your questions, and then we will have a final wrap-up. And I would like to ask you as well to take the opportunity of this workshop today to use it as a platform to get used to each other, to know each other, and then this will be give you the opportunity to even to go beyond this workshop in contacting the other ESFRI projects and landmarks in order you have challenges to do. So in this respect, I wish you a lively debate and interaction between you and the panelists, and I hope you will enjoy the workshop. So now let me first introduce you Giorgio Rossi. I welcome very much Giorgio Rossi, who is Professor of Physics at the University of Milano. And in June 2016, Giorgio was elected as chair of ESFRI due to his extensive experience in the ESFRI process. He was mainly involved and responsible to steer the ESFRI Roadmap process in 2016 and the current roadmap process in 2018. So, Giorgio, please, may I give you the floor?
Thank you. Thank you, Beate. Thanks for organizing this. Thanks to the Stress-Free project that has built in this mission of having exchange of experience workshops as work instruments for the ESFRI projects and the ESFRI landmarks, in order to exchange experience and then produce alignment of good practices that facilitate the implementation of the projects and their progress towards the scientific goals and science service goals that are expected from infrastructures. So I remind the ESFRI methodology. So ESFRI does, among other things, but maybe primarily, at least from the public point of view, do road mapping. And the road mapping follows transparent, publicly available rules and procedures. And to prepare this last roadmap that was presented yesterday to you and to another larger audience, we followed guidelines that have been presented in advance in a document that is called Roadmap 2018 Guide that is available on the website and that was available to all those who were preparing a proposal. And that can be downloaded, of course. You don't have to memorize this, just go on the ESFRI website and then you find very easily how to access this information. Now in the roadmap, you have seen these three pictures. These three pictures summarize in a graphical way our methodology, the methodology of evaluation and assessment of new proposals is this flow diagram on the left. It has been discussed many times before. It's based on the concept of independent evaluation of scientific merit and maturity, robustness of the consortium, the political engagement, the financial plan, the human resource setup for a new infrastructure. And then there is a synthesis moment between the results of the scientific evaluation and the results of the maturity evaluation, and this synthesis produces recommendations to the forum, and the forum decides. For projects that are already on the roadmap, which is the subject of the current workshop, then there is the process that ESFRI has engaged in since a few years of monitoring and periodically reviewing. This is a process that, as you learned, maybe in some points that were raised yesterday in the discussion, is work in progress as everything, as always, but with a new dimension that has been introduced by the latest Council conclusions of the 29th of May of this year that engages ESFRI as the framework where member states and the Commission together should develop a methodology to monitor the performances of research infrastructures, not just the ESFRI research infrastructure, but all research infrastructures that are producing access for excellent science in Europe. So it's work in process on the two fronts, the internal fronts. This picture concerns us. It says that we went through the monitoring of the 2008 projects and the 2010 projects in order to prepare the roadmap 2018. The 2008 projects were reaching the 10 years, so some of them were meeting the minimal requirements to be considered as potential landmarks. The decision of bringing a new infrastructure to the landmark list is a strategic decision, so it's taken by the forum, but it's a strategic decision that applies only to those projects that actually have all the, at least the minimal requirements. Those that do not go out from the roadmap after the 10 years. And we had both cases going from 2016 to 2018. And then we did also the monitoring of the 2010 projects. These are the projects that are nearing, they still have a couple of years to go before expiring their 10 years period. And so through the monitoring, we could identify some special needs, some weaknesses, and also we could be happy in some cases to verify that there are some strengths and some good progress towards the goal of establishing a fully implemented infrastructure. And so this will go on for the next cycle. As we announced yesterday, the next roadmap will be 2021. There was an asterisk in there because it was still open to discussion. The forum has decided early this week. And so by that time, the projects that entered in 2010 will have to be verified for minimal requirements, and then they will be considerable or not for landmark status, and so on and so forth. Now, all of this is inspired to what is called the Lifecycle Approach. That's the picture to the right, and it is what we will look into now, because it concerns the different phases from the design to the full operation and eventually to the termination. So you will see again these pictures with some comments. Life cycle approach, it means the evolution in time of the ESFRI projects and of the ESFRI landmarks, and the needs and targets of the implementation of the infrastructure are understood as a sequence of phases from the concept to the termination. Now, in the concept development, this is something that you have passed because you are already in the ESFRI roadmap. The concept is established, the consortium is identified, access policy and funding concept is outlined, scientific and project leadership are identified. In the design, this is what is the requirement for entering in the evaluation. So the projects who are already on the ESFRI list are beyond this stage. Those who are not yet in the ESFRI list have to take good note of what is required to enter. The design study in some form must be completed. It doesn't mean the label design study of a European project, but it means a substantial feasibility study supported by some institution or consortium of institution, but that has all the characteristics of a feasibility study completed. A business case, political financial support obtained. As you know, you need at least 3 member states or associate countries at governmental level to declare financial and political support. Common access policy fully outlined, top-level breakdown of cost, credible governance, and human resource policy well outlined. The preparation of the new projects, business and construction plan, political and financial support secured, data policy and data management cost book plan, legal entity identification. Then here we are on the roadmap, and on the roadmap the goal is to go towards implementation. So you have to identify the site, to start construction if it is an infrastructure that requires some physical buildings and construction to be set in place, deployment of the organization and of the legal entity. So for those who pursue the European legal status, the ESFRI, the phase 1, phase 2, recruitment, international property rights, innovation policies, operation upgrade plan, secure funding for operation. And operation, of course, is when the infrastructure starts to deliver. The deliverable are open access for scientists from outside the infrastructure to perform their science, in-house research, so that frontier research results are expected during the operation phase. Services to the scientific community must be available. and outreach activities, continuous upgrade of the instrumentation and methodologies, political and financial support for long-term operation. So this is what characterizes the operation. The operation phase in time, of course, is the more extended one with respect to the others. There are infrastructures that are designed to operate 30, 40 years or more. Typically 20 to 30 years may be a first cycle before a major upgrade, and so all of this is in the operation phase, and through the operation phase, all these categories that are listed there must be constantly verified, monitored, and the infrastructure must guarantee that it is in the conditions to continue that level of operation. And then eventually, the life cycle includes also obsolescence, other infrastructures replacing with better technology or with different approach. So there might be dissolution of the consortium and of the mission, dismantling of facility in some cases, resurrection of the site, would be reorientation of the premises for other scopes or for other new infrastructures, reuse, merger of operation, organization, major upgrade. It's one thing that has already occurred in some of the successful and operational infrastructure to come to the need of a shutdown for a major upgrade. Major implies a reinvestment that is a sizable fraction of the total original investment. Continuous upgrade is what goes into the operation. Operation for several years means that the infrastructure must stay at the state of the art, must stay. If it's a landmark, in the definition of the landmark, it's contained the concept that the infrastructure must remain the reference infrastructure for that domain. And so it requires continuous upgrade. So through the evaluation process, I'm stepping back in time to the first phase of the life cycle. The preparation of the proposal, we said, these are the category, business construction plan, political financial support, data policy and data management, cost book, legal entity. Later, once you are evaluated for entering the roadmap, you start the process toward implementation. So for roadmaps that, infrastructure, that are on the roadmaps, you start being helped or subject, as you like to say, to monitoring by ESFRI. And the dimensions are, for the implementation, identification of the site and construction, if it is the case, deployment of organization, legal entity, recruitment, the categories we saw before. This is subject of not evaluation because the project is already on the roadmap, but it's a subject of monitoring. If the infrastructure has reached the landmark status, then it's expected to be in operation. This is not entirely true for those infrastructures that imply a very large construction phase. To be clear, some of these large undertakings, say the spallation source, just to give an example, are long-term construction phases, 10 years or that order of magnitude, before actually delivering the final goal, that is opening access for a source of neutrons, in the case of the spallation source. But they have become landmarks not only because they could not do the full construction phase and the preparation and everything during the first 10 years, but because by the end of the 10 years, it was clear that the spallation source is worldwide known as the next major contribution to neutron science in the world. So it is a landmark in the sense that it's a reference infrastructure. It's not ready to operate yet, but it's advancing in the construction. So this is the concept that may modulate in a few cases, in a very few cases. Another large construction is the XFEL in Hamburg, same kind of undertaking with a 3 kilometers underground tunnel with a superconducting accelerator as a source for a user laboratory. And this one is now a landmark and has reached, after becoming a landmark very quickly, the early operation phase, and so it is delivering science. So there may be a little delay in full operation in a few cases, but in general, the landmarks are in the operation phase. And so they will be observed for production of frontier research results, services to the science community, and all the other activities that are expected and listed there. The methodology of this observation is a matter of elaboration by ESFRI at this time. The politically correct definition will be periodic update. I assure you that this has been a nice synthesis, of which I'm very proud, for a complex discussion that we had. Just without making the thing mysterious, the worry by part of the ESFRI Forum was that ESFRI could become, without having the mandate, an evaluation body. ESFRI is not, cannot be, by the way it's built, and does not want to be an evaluation body. And also, ESFRI does not want to be a load, a burden for the infrastructures. On the opposite, we want to help infrastructures to fulfill their scope if they are in the landmark list. So this means that we will ask and we will try to intercept all the internal evaluation and national evaluation, stakeholder evaluation processes that are typical of a landmark infrastructure, scientific advisory committee, periodic reviews by the funding agencies, and these produce reports, results. ESFRI would like to have all this knowledge and then periodically update, mostly on that basis, maybe with some further considerations, but not with a heavy evaluation procedure that will be an extra weight for the projects, and this is not our intention. So it's called update. We are working on that. Again, the new mandate from the Council interferes positively, I think. We could have a peak instead of a zero in our activity of defining the good methodology. And in principle, we would like to be ready with a full, transparent, well-thought methodology to start this process at the beginning of 2020. So we have a year to make sure that the methodology for updating landmarks will be sound and accepted and tailored to the different kind of, very different kind of infrastructures that we do have in the different areas of research on the ESFRI roadmap. Then, of course, not all the landmarks will be updated at the same time. We will define the correct cycle of a few every year so that each one knows that every 5 or 6 years, I would guess, undergoes a new update from the ESFRI point of view. So the whole process is detached from the schedule of the publication of the roadmap. In the subsequent roadmap editions, there may be some landmarks may say has been updated with a line of comment or whatever. But those that have not, it's just because they are in the pipeline, it doesn't make any ranking. It's just maintenance of the landmark list. Okay? So this is work in process. Now, very quickly, this you know, because it's the still stepping back at the beginning. The two parallel processes, here you see the categories that are looked at by the strategic working groups. Strategic working groups cover the scientific domains, health and food and environment and energy and social and cultural, innovation, physical science and engineering and electronic infrastructures. And the implementation group, it's another fundamental work group, permanent work group of ESFRI, has to go through these 8 categories and evaluate these aspects. Again, as ESFRI, likewise all human activities is a continuous learning process. Based on the results of the 2018 roadmap, we have learned some new lessons that might bring to a further refinement of what you can read now on the 2018 roadmap guide in terms of being more and more flexible to capture the exact dimensions tailored to the exact kind of infrastructure. This is a continuous effort because the diversity of the infrastructure projects keeps increasing somehow. We started for many years just considering 2 categories, central site or distributed. In fact, it's more than that. There are distributed in different areas, have very different characteristics, and therefore the evaluation from the point of view of a likelihood of the successful implementation must be flexible enough to capture what for each kind of distributed infrastructure or each kind of infrastructure in general are the true elements that may convince the ESFRI Forum for the readiness of that infrastructure to go into the 10-year cycle. I mean, the goal of ESFRI is that during the 10 years that a project has to reach implementation, the goal is reached. It corresponds to a bet and with high expectation of success because it's an engagement of work, of resources, of commission support, as it will be said by Harry later, and this is meant to produce the maximum result that has having an operational infrastructure. So it's important for us to be in the position of making such bet, saying, yes, this infrastructure, if it enters now, we are very confident that will be ready in 10 years or before. It has happened at least in one case, to move to the landmark list, which means to move to the category of investments that have produced the result, and so then it has to be supported for operation and to deliver return on the investment. Projects that don't meet this confidence level by ESFRI are rather delayed in their entry, not discouraged. In most cases, there are no reasons to discourage, but there are also no reason to anticipate the entry in the 10-year cycle if there are serious worries that 10 years might be short for the specific case. So the minimal key requirements for the projects in the phase towards implementation, so these are already ESFRI projects, so projects on board of the ESFRI roadmap, are summarized here. Again, you find these in the guide, and there is only black and green is a different categories that the green apply only to the distributed research infrastructures, but this is what I anticipated we should work out better with more details so that when the start of the new procedure will be announced in June 2019, more refined rules will be available. So this, I don't read through all of that because you probably know it or you know where to find it, but for the scientific aspect, excellence, pan-European relevance, socioeconomic impact, and the e-infrastructure of the project that is interfacing the general e-infrastructure of data exchange, data access, remote use, and etc., are the aspects under monitoring. From the point of view of the implementation, what we call maturity, these are again the categories that will be the subject of the monitoring of the ESFRI project, stakeholder commitment, if there is a distributed infrastructure, of course, the establishment of a central hub with all the agreements that it implies for its functioning, and well-defined national nodes with well-defined agreements. These are important things that must come to a full definition during the implementation phase, and so on and so forth. User strategy, access policy, preparation work, and planning. Now, more categories for the maturity: governance and management, human resource policies, finances, and risks. Okay, so let me state just another moment on these. It's clear that through a couple of monitoring cycles, which is at most what the projects undergo before reaching the 10 years, it's basically 2. All of these will be observed. The progress in all categories will be observed. Warnings will be given, and this has been considered useful by projects starting already in 2016, knowing that they are reaching the 10 years and that there are still some specific points that need to be strengthened or solved or well-defined in order to reach successful implementations. All of these will be monitored by ESFRI, again, in the scope of contributing, helping, providing any sort of non-financial support, because as you know, ESFRI is an informal body, has no financial resources, but the projects, I would say, can enjoy of a big human work effort by ESFRI in doing all these processes. I think this is it's not quantified in euros, but it's a big contribution because it's a lot of work done by people who have knowledge and experience and are generally acknowledged for that. So there is this contribution of ESFRI to help reaching the appropriate level in all these categories to be considered as a landmark. Then, as I said, to become a landmark is also a strategic decision. Strategic decision intervenes. The ESFRI is a strategy forum. To say it very broadly, if a project is ready to operate, has been successfully implemented, and is filling a gap in the portfolio of European infrastructures, then it's clear that it's strategically desirable, and so that is very obvious. Other cases may occur in principle in the future, but we don't expect too many because we try to manage the entries in the roadmap, not to have conflictual overlaps, complementarities, but not conflictual overlaps between different projects, because that will weaken the whole thing. So these are the ideas. As I said, we will have to refine these. This is the state of what was used for the 2018 roadmap, what guided the projects, and what guided ESFRI in evaluating and concluding about the results of the new entries and the new entries in the landmark. So the change of status of 8 projects from project to landmarks. For the next time around, we have a full fall and winter and spring period to refine, further refine these requirements and publish this in a workshop, as we did last time for the launch of the new process that is foreseen for June 2019. But this is of interest just for those projects that are not yet in the ESFRI roadmap and foresee the opportunity of applying. So very quickly, you have the roadmap. If you don't have it, you will have it one way or the other, just asking or applying in the website that I will advertise in a second. The landscape analysis in this roadmap is a built-in part in the document. That's why the document is so heavy. It was already an important part in the 2016, but that time was only available on the website because the forum had taken note of that, but had not adopted. Now the landscape analysis is fully adopted. It means that it fully reflects the analysis of the infrastructure landscape by all ESFRI, which means by the member states. This is again a response to the Council, who asked ESFRI to look at the full panorama and the full landscape of infrastructures. And so, as you know, it's organized in scientific domains where we have drawn charts through different dimensions that indicate the overlaps and the interfaces between the different infrastructures. And then we started the exercise of the interconnections. So these, have a look at these and understand your projects, how is building also the interfaces that are expected in our landscape analysis. How is it true that data exchange, communication, and possible synergy with these other projects on the roadmap, and more broadly in the general landscape, can be developed, because these are going to be more and more key elements also of the monitoring. An infrastructure that grows in isolation, that cultivates its own excellence in the solitude, is not what is meant for the ESFRI ecosystem and the general infrastructure ecosystem. So this landscape analysis, use it also as an element to guide, to criticize also in some cases, of course, but to guide your path towards the implementation. Okay, and the cross-cutting aspect, again, this is describes activities that are expected to be done and are typically done by all infrastructures, about training, about innovation, and so on and so forth, internationalization, and you will read through all of that. Okay, so I have finished, and I think I used up my time, so this you can find in the roadmap, and if you don't have a 2 pounds of roadmap in your hands, you can download the full PDF, and there is a interactive PDF on the website. All is operational thanks to the stress-free project. And keep in mind that for the innovation, we have this book, ESFRI Scripta number 3, that contains the knowledge of ESFRI about aspects that have to do with innovation in industry. And for long-term sustainability, we have also this book. Everything can be downloaded or asked for physical copy to the ESFRI website that, again, contains the state-of-the-art knowledge of ESFRI in terms of sustainability. Thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent workshop.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Thank you very much, Giorgio. It was very interesting for us to see that ESFRI has produced a solid and transparent process and framework conditions for the new projects. And now let us come to the next speech and look what is the service of the European Commission for the new projects toward implementation. And for this reason, I would like to ask Paul Tinder, who is working for the European Commission. And Paul has a master's degree in law, and he's currently the legal officer responsible for the European Research Infrastructure Consortium, namely ERIC, and the Commission representative of the ESFRI Implementation Group. Paul will explain you how Horizon 2020 Preparatory Phase funding will be provided and to the new projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes, it is. Thank you for trying to listen to me about preparatory phase funding, which is the money the new projects will get who are on the roadmap, or some money which we will give for the projects who are supposed to go on the roadmap later. I arrived a bit late because something happened here, which is I went through the valley of death, meaning I couldn't find a place where to go. When you look at the preparatory phase, and I will come back there in a few minutes, you have 4 years the time to prepare yourself to get financial, political, scientific, technical commitments of all your stakeholders. In the beginning, it looks like you have lots of time. At the end, what we see very often is time is running out. Hence, the idea about valley of death, it means you're at the end of the preparatory phase, you have a report, but you don't know what to do because there's no legal basis anymore or other fora to work together. Anyway, we'll come back on that, but this is one of the main points and lessons we have learned. Now, from the Commission side, when you have a preparatory phase project, what you see is, in our terminology, it's a coordinated support action. It will be a call. The call is being basically already defined who can apply for it. You see on the 14th of November, we open the call, and you have until 20th of March to make your proposal. Who are eligible? Well, we have defined this to avoid that we have some other pirates who try to have money from us there. And what is important there is you should understand that research infrastructures are part of the excellence pillar. What does it mean? It means that your proposal will be evaluated like you do for integrating activities and other activities in the excellence pillar. So the first point where evaluators will look at, even when you have been invited to propose, is there enough excellence? So don't forget, even when you are mentioned, you know that the money is reserved, one can still fail the proposal. Doesn't happen very often, but still. What is the idea there? It is, as you see at the last bullet of the preparatory phase thing, you want to go so far that everything is in place after 2, 3, or 4 years, where you can make your case for getting a legal entity which will start actually operating this infrastructure or constructing this infrastructure. That means that you have convinced the scientists, the other stakeholders, industry if necessary, that you have a new thing which is worthwhile. You have also convinced your funders that there is money to be given there, and it makes sense that you do that. You have also convinced your policymakers that they will support this. For example, one little detail what could happen, and we have had this for some projects, did you decide about where this infrastructure will be sited? The headquarters. Why is that? You need a leader. You need somebody who is putting forward political agendas. You need somebody who can interact with funding ministries or agencies or councils. If you have, at the end of the 4 year, did not get to that stage there, you will lose momentum. Because most likely, especially if it's a prestigious project, some people know about prestigious projects, you can spend 5, 6, 7 years of negotiation of where it should happen. It's not about the substance, it's about the policy part there. Now, what should be the outcome of the preparatory phase? You have your technical design. Technical design means in this framework, you know how you're going to work together. If you have a distributed one, or you know what you're going to build if you are doing construction one. You have a financial planning. And that seems to be obvious, but it's not so obvious always. You know what you expect that there will be as contributions directly to the legal unit, the legal entity which is running the infrastructure, or what you expect in terms of a distributed infrastructure, what will be spent or built in the nodes in the several countries which are participating. Budget estimates. You would have to negotiate budget estimates. We would expect that you would engage, basically member states or funding agencies, that there is a basis for at least 5 years of financial commitment. Infrastructures, research infrastructures is long term. It doesn't make sense to have a commitment for 2 years and then you will have to restart all over the thing what you're going to do. We have one infrastructure where basically the biggest charge for them in the central node is to find money. Not to offer services, it's not to help scientists to move further, it is trying to find money to do their work. This is not the idea. So the idea is really that that has been put in a stable factor. You need legal and financial agreements, meaning you need to know what kind of legal entity you want to have. We will discuss this in the panel discussion, but it's not so obvious because it depends on what kind of stakeholders, users you will have. Financial rules, for example, also voting rights, are things which can delay the process quite long. You will see that initially, very often, your stakeholders will all ask for a veto right. They want to have unanimity because they all want to be involved. They want to know what is happening with the money they give there or the important role they play in the infrastructure. If you do that with unanimity, obviously it will not go into work. So it means that you have to find a balance between, on the one hand, not outvoting stakeholders which have investments there and which you want to keep also in your infrastructure, but on the other hand, to give a flexibility that you can be operational, because otherwise you become a political organization, and I think you're better off then in the European Commission or otherwise. So don't do that. What is the impact, as you see there in red, which is the formal part as well, for the evaluation of the preparatory phase proposals, is that at the end you have everything in place that you could start construction. Then there's a second call, well actually part of the, yes, which is the support to the early phase. Here we go one step back. At the end of the early phase, what you will see is also the support is a bit less, the deadlines are the same. At the end of the early phase, you're going to actually try to have your infrastructure being ready to be proposed to be on the ESFRI Roadmap. So you go one step further back. you have a certain strategic importance, maturity, but not enough at this moment. And it means that you have to put in place the elements which are necessary to go on that roadmap. Now, and what you see is it's much more detailed, what you see here as points of work which are going to undertake. And these points here will be the main criteria on which basis evaluators will look at the proposal. So basically they will look at, again, a budget each time, but it's also to look at how do you do complementarities. It is also to look at which is your user strategy, your access policy. They're all straightforward, but sometimes quite difficult to explain in proper words that people also understand what you want to do. And you see as the last bullet there, the infrastructure headquarters. This was the part on the siting, which I was just saying. Try to have that really at the end of the preparatory phase, at least have agreed on that or have agreed on a procedure to agree on that. Because if you don't do that, you will spend lots of time actually discussing this instead of doing science. You see that you have the budgets there, which you need to do, the governance structure. If you're distributed infrastructure, you have to explain how the central hub will work together with the nodes, what kind of influence the central hub can have there. You will see with the main stakeholders, how can they have a say in what you're doing and on which basis. And these are all things to be worked out in a proper way. What is the main messages for you with respect to preparatory phase? It is like integrating activities calls, design phase calls, etc. in our program. So we use similar evaluators, we use a similar process there, and again, it's excellence. You will have, when you get the grant, you will have the famous midterm reviews, you will have to go through reporting each time. It is as a normal grant. What is important is, and then again we come to the valley of death, the last bullet there, which is if you see that the preparatory phase is too short to get everything in place because of political or financial commitment rules or other things, you will need to have something in place which is called for a transition phase. It means it allows you to have your consortium continuing on another basis, but it gives you a basis of discussing how to actually implement the infrastructure. If you do not have this, it becomes a very complicated process. And we have some examples where actually some of the projects got in danger because of that. Now, main messages of things which can go wrong. I like those things normally, so it's okay. So, citing services. What are you going to offer as services? And the thing which can go wrong is that you are saying that from day one that you are being established as an infrastructure, you will have the full set of services available. Nonsense, you will not have that normally. You will have a phased approach normally for that, and you say how you build it up. Human resources policies, even for some of the infrastructures where it's not so important in terms of the quantity of people being there, evaluators will look at that quite a lot, and you will see that if you think like, but why should I, with a team of 10 people, look at human resources? It is an element you want to address. Ethical issues. This has been raising quite some confusion for research infrastructures. You do physics or astronomy, etc. We would like you to address potential ethical issues. Why? Because it actually helps you to defend yourself for any fallout you could have. There are examples about that as well. For example, when you work on earthquakes, like in Italy, you can end up in very nasty situations if you don't have things which actually is trying to defend you there. In the medical sector, it's obvious that you need to address ethical issues, but also social sciences, same story. When you look at SHARE and CESDA and organizations like this. And then, finally, one of the important lessons what we have learned is that the biggest challenge is to get financial commitments for longer term. So it means that when you are busy in your preparatory phase, your consortium members are very positive, etc. You want to involve funding agencies and ministries well before the end of the preparatory phase. Why? Because it's very nice that you make your budget plans, you say, I have my services, you say, here I make my case, but the ministry is not really aware of that and doesn't have funding available. Or there is national road mapping which doesn't allow the ministries or funding agencies to come forward. And you want to address that really very well in advance, because obviously, why there are delays very often, it is because the financial commitments are not there. The European Spallation Source took a very long time to get to construction because they couldn't get the financial commitments of all the member states which they needed to complete the whole machine. And we have some other examples like that. So the message is for the preparatory phase, it's great because the Commission really likes to help maturity in a certain way that projects can move forward and become real infrastructures. It is an evaluation process which we use on the basis of excellence, which is not necessarily the best evaluation process. But we are in that pillar, so we cannot do anything else there. And thirdly is, really think about using it as best as possible, because the 4 years, or the 2 years for other projects, it goes very fast. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Paul, so what I have learned these days is that it's not the project itself, but it's more the activities you will present and the targets you will reach within the proposal to convince for getting money or funding for the preparatory phase. So it's the whole of this. And it was very interesting to see from Paul what is the key elements requested from the European Commission to get this funding. So now we will go further to more detailed aspects, and this will lead us to the panels. And I'm very much pleased that we were able to win Laurence Lenoir. She will moderate the first panel about governance. And Laurence works for the Belgium Federal Science Policy Office, and she is ESFRI delegate since 2016. Laurence represents Belgium in the ERI committee and in the governing bodies of a few ESFRI research infrastructures. She was vice chair of the ESFRI working group on long-term sustainability, and she has also participated in the OECD Global Science Forum expert group on strengthening the sustainability and effectiveness of international research infrastructures. So I will hand over now the moderation to Laurence, and she will introduce her panelists. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm also a member of the implementation group, which is probably the most appropriate thing for this workshop. Just to tell you, as Beat explained earlier, we are here for an exchange of experience. This first session is more specific, covering governance aspects, so that has been a bit already explained by Harry before, but this will go over the governance structure, so which committees are foreseen for your project, on the management team you have to implement and how you plan to implement it, on the choice of legal entity to set up, and also on the selection of the central office, the location of the central office, and possibly also on the selection of the nodes, if you have a labeling process or something similar. We will not in this specific session cover things which will be handled later, so no pure legal aspects, no pure financial aspects. And before I introduce you to our first speakers, I would just like to have an idea of who's in the room. So please, if you are representing a new project on the very recent roadmap, can you please raise your hand? Okay. And if you are here to talk about your experience and you are representing a project which was on a former edition of the ESFRI Roadmap, can you also raise your hand now? Okay, so more new projects. Okay, good. Because of time constraints, we will first listen to our speakers, and then only after you will have the opportunity to ask some specific questions. In the very end of the workshop, you have the generic questions. And now let me first introduce you briefly to our speakers. If you want more details, and I don't say everything, you have a leaflet with the full CV. So first, we will listen to Harry, which is also officially known as Paul Tuinder. But now that you are in the ESFRI family, you have to call him Harry. So Harry works for the European Commission. He's the legal officer responsible for the ERIC, the European Research Infrastructure Consortium, and he is also the EC representative in the implementation group. Then we will listen to Massimo Cocco. He's the coordinator of EPOS. EPOS is the European Plate Observing Platform, which is a new landmark on the 2018 roadmap. Congratulations. And it was also not written in the brochure, but Massimo was also part of the ESFRI working group on long-term sustainability. And finally, we will listen to Luca Pezzati. He's here as the coordinator of ERIS. I hope I pronounce it well because we hear a different way of pronouncing it. So ERIS is the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science. It's on the roadmap since 2016, and it's in the middle of its preparatory phase project. So probably you can already sit, or you prefer to stay hidden for the moment. Harry, you start? You want to show your slides? Okay.
Okay, I will not make it very long. It's about options for legal structures. Why would you look at it, and what is there to implement the infrastructure and operate it? So why not MOUs? Why not consortium agreements? Why not another way instead of going to this rather painful thing about getting a legal structure, needing lawyers for that? So you have a number of bullets which explains why you would like to have an institutionalized idea there. For example, you want to have a central management structure which is able to employ or to receive staff. You want to have a strategy which you can really agree at international level, at that legal entity there. The legal entity allows you to give long-term support there. It allows you to pool resources. And actually, it helps also to speak with third parties if you would like to. You can make agreements, contracts with industry, with other international organizations, with other infrastructures, which is all not possible when you don't have a legal entity. Bottom line, if you don't have a legal entity, you're a network, which is very good in many instances, but not for the research infrastructure program for us. So, you go for a legal entity, you go through normally a little analysis about what is available. You start with national legal entities, so companies, foundations, associations, and you look a little bit about what is there, what has happened. You will see also when you read the ESFRI Roadmap, the new one, infrastructures choose differently. You can have a German company, a UK company, Belgium Association, International Sans But Lucratif. You can choose those things. What is the advantage for a national one? It goes very quick. If you want to establish an ISBL in Belgium, normally it takes you, I think, around 1 month. Officially. In Belgium, there is a difference between, well, okay, no, sorry. Okay. Anyway, it goes rather quick normally. It's a royal decree where it's established, and there's a certain flexibility. But even more important, the national authorities obviously know how to deal with an ISBL or with a limited company or with a GmbH in Germany. If you go for a European one, the ERIC, European Research Infrastructure Consortium, you have some advantages, which is you have a legal personality instantly recognized by all the member states. You're going to have actually a disadvantage or an advantage, as you wish, which is it's only member states and international organizations which can become member. The idea behind is that you have ministries, member states supporting you long term. So funding should be easier. This is not always the case in practice, but that's a different thing. You're recognized by the European Commission, meaning when you're established, you get into the official journal, you have statutes, and it looks very sexy. You have an exemption for VAT excise duties. Point is a little bit for what exactly activities, but that's still a point of discussion. And that's a real nice advantage. You can make your own procurement rules, which can be much more adaptable to the scientific or other activity which you're undertaking. When you compare those two, the disadvantage of an ERIC is it's longer term, it's heavy, you have statutes, the amendment of statutes take a long time, and if we take again the GmbH, which is known in Germany, when you're an ERIC, they will look at you like, who are you? Still. There's still an unknown factor there, which means for practical reasons, opening bank accounts, other things, is complicated with the ERIC. Even when you show the official journal that you're established, doesn't matter too much. And obviously, you can go for a real international organization, treaty-based. You will do that when you really have a long-term program, you have really very substantial investments, and you need privileges and immunities to protect your investments. Only then it makes sense to go through this rather painful process often, which takes around 5-6 years, if you're lucky, and you go through ratification by parliaments. It's a very heavy process, as I said, but it gives you a number of advantages. Again, much better than just the ERIC. You also have privilege immunities for the staff, so you have your own taxation system for salaries. You don't bother about VAT because you don't pay that. It's no question there. You see the examples, CERN, ESO, EMBL, ITER, SKA, which are really long-term projects there. So what you want to look at, if you are now looking at which legal option should I take or where should I really want to pay attention to, your funders. If you're with private entities, private foundations, charities, which play an important role, if you go for an ERIC, you go for an international organization, they cannot be the member. So in a certain way, you exclude them. If you go for a national entity, obviously they can be a member like any member of a national company. So you keep them much nearer to your decision-making process and they feel more engaged. If you deal with only European organizations or entities, you can go for the national entity still in Europe or for the ERIC. However, if you have also non-European states, meaning like US, like Russian Federation or others, you don't want to do the ERIC if you want them as a member, because they will not become member of that thing. The problem for that is the recognition of the European Court of Justice for Dispute Settlement, for example, and you will see they will not be interested in that. So you would look at either a proper international organization, if it's worthwhile, or you go for a national legal entity. Obviously, you want to look at, are you single-sided or distributed, which makes also important whether you want to choose for a national legal entity or not. Because if you have a GmbH and you have parts of the infrastructure all over Europe, it creates some complications about labor laws, about taxation and other things there. In terms of political support, which is the last one there, it's important that we have found out that for some infrastructures who were perfectly working under a national legal entity, a private one, like a GmbH or like in Norway, an AB, some member states found it very difficult to continue funding. Why? Because they could not give money to a private entity, public money, which is going there. So this was one of the reasons why they had to change, even when the functioning was no problem there. So be aware of this kind of constraints which you could get to. Thank you.
I don't know if it works. Yeah. Massimo has also prepared some slides where you will share, I think, more your experience in EPOS. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to present EPOS, but I would like to go straight to the point and to give some recommendation or some lesson that we learned in our experience. The only premises are two, that EPOS is a distributed research infrastructure with 25 countries engaged in Europe. And in Europe, because we have UK, which is only hosting a part, which is still Europe, at least for a while. And we selected the legal seat and the hosting of the central hub that is hosted in 3 countries through a call managed by the government representatives. So the decision of the legal model was never discussed. So ERIC was more than an option. And everyone agreed that we were going to build an ERIC. So the first message is the sustainability. We are here discussing governance. Governance is a central part of sustainability. But sustainability involves 4 aspects which are close interlinked, which involve the technical part, the legal and governance, the legal and the financial. And the link among these 3 through legal aspects is pretty clear. When we decided to host the legal seat through the call and the governance model was clear that we were not trying to create a new legal subject. But the goal of the legal subject was to manage the delivery framework that we were going to build and implement for the entire solid earth science. So the choice of the ERIC was directly dedicated to manage the EPOS delivery framework. Oh, here it is. Okay, and here I just was trying to point out how the different legal and governance are related to the technical and to the financial. In particular, in terms of the access to the services, which have legal and governance issues, and in terms of the financial viability, which is exactly one of the major goals of the legal body. Yeah, I'm trying the green. Okay, so now the challenges that I would like to emphasize here is the following. The first one is the transition among the different phases of the research life cycle. Giorgio, before, was discussing, and also Harry in his former presentation, they discussed the transition from the preparatory phase to the implementation phase. But here the transition occurs at every phase, and in particular there is the transition when the ERIC became operational. So achieving the legal establishment of an ERIC does not mean that the day after the ERIC is operational. And this transition strongly depends on the architecture and the governance model and the governance structure of the infrastructure. The second one of the major goals of the governance and the governance body is to achieve financial viability, which is the only achievable. Long-term sustainability is the dream, but we have to be honest, in the short term, this is not what we can really tackle. But we need to build a financial viability which is able to go toward long-term sustainability during the infrastructure life cycle. The other challenge that we had to take is maintain an effective management team through the entire life cycle. And this means a human research policy, but this also strongly depends on the law of the state where the legal seat is hosted. Because hiring and maintaining the skills that you are generated is tricky, is easy, and you need a plan, and this plan has to be envisioned in the long term. Now, I will go directly to the recommendations. I have 4. So the first one, the message is that in order to establish a governance model, you need to engage the national authorities since the beginning of the preparatory phase, because they must be aware and they must understand the functional architecture. They should not only understand how you will financially support, which is the political and strategic procedure to sign the ERIC. They need to understand how the services will be provided and which is the sustainability of the service provision, the data and service provision, which implies all the technical, legal, governance and financial issues. And this is important. Indeed, I believe that even if in our reporting to ESFRI we were asked to engage all the stakeholders since the beginning, in EPOS what we did in the preparatory phase, we focused on the data providers, IT people and governance, national authorities. So 3 target audience were our primary goals, target of our communication plan. The second recommendation is the harmonization with national strategies and procedures and the priorities. So your plan to implement the services, unless the budget of the ERIC is big enough to maintain the entire delivery framework. Now, for a distributed research infrastructure, this is tricky, because the ERIC will manage the governance of the service provision, and therefore the delivery framework must be large. In some cases, the cost for the delivery framework are marginal with respect to the cost of the ERIC, and this is easy life. But you have also the opposite, in which the cost of the delivery framework and the national nodes, they are costly with respect to the ERIC. In this case, you should rely on in-kind contribution and national financial support, but the governance has to be strong enough and has to be designed in order to intercept and to be able to attract this money. And this means that you need to harmonize your plan since the beginning. You cannot start this at the end of the preparatory phase because it will be too late. And this is also strictly related to the sustainability of the delivery framework itself. The other recommendation concerns the legal body, because you need the cross-disciplinary skills. This is obvious, everybody here knows. But the problem is how to preserve the human capital around the infrastructure for the entire life cycle. And this, in our experience, is difficult. It has been difficult, it's still difficult, because the moment that you have skilled people, these people can move through mobility, which is fine, perhaps to another infrastructure, to another country. But honestly speaking, our difficulties were to apply the Italian laws for hiring and maintaining the contracts. And that was the challenge. And they change and they restrict. And this means that you have an international organization, but maintain the human capital is a challenge. And the last recommendation, if I am, here is the transition. The transition from the implementation to the operational phase is part of the life cycle of an infrastructure. But for the governance, this has a tricky implication, because also the ERIC needs a transition phase, and the size of this transition phase strongly depends on the timeline and the roadmap for achieving a full operational phase for the delivery framework, which depends not only on the legal way in which you can decide which is financially eligible in your service provision, but this also depends on on the budget and also on the time that the infrastructure will take to validate the services. And this, to me, is something that is also a message to ESFRI, because the transition to the operational ERIC has to be better investigated, because it's something that affect not only the performances of the governance, but also affect the human resource policy, it affects the financial, and it affects also the way in which the representing entities will be able to play the role of a representing entity of an ERIC. This is not immediate. The research organization, at least in Italy, but I guess in many other countries, they are not trained to act as a representing entity of an ERIC in 4 years of the preparatory phase, that they consider an easy project. So please dedicate attention to that. And I finish here.
Okay, so now we will listen to Luca Pezzati, who will present some speaking points, but without the visual support. So.
Yes, sorry, I didn't prepare slides, actually, mostly because I don't want to lecture. I was here 2 years ago in the exchange of experience in Amsterdam, learning. I'm still here to learn. In the meantime, I interviewed several infrastructure, including Massimo. Thank you, by the way, for your consultancy. I have been asked to trace some lines around the problem of governance. And first, I have to make a disclaimer. We are really in the midst of the preparatory phase. We had the midterm meeting in Warsaw last week. And so we are just planning. We don't know if we have solutions, because for the moment, we are planning. But until here, I experienced some personal problems, let's say, or issues about governance. And I think, especially the new projects, we are now approaching the writing of the preparatory phase, they will face the same. First, the preparatory phase is an European project. So, coming from your integrating activities, you may undervalue the problem that you are establishing the governance of an European project, but also traces of the governance of the infrastructure, because in the preparatory phase, your infrastructure will have probably the legal form of the European project. Cases are many, but that is our case at least. So, first, the standard governance of the European project is not very, in my experience, suitable to continue and to at least to bring the infrastructure through the transition phase. But you will have to start. So you will have to have a steering committee, you will have to have the standard bodies, the General Assembly, the Governing Board. And this can be tricky during your preparatory phase if you did wrong choices about roles and people. So be careful in this initial phase. Wow, we were lucky because we practically established the fact that we wanted to go for an ERIC at the kickoff, because otherwise the governance that you have to plan is of course very much depending on the legal form which you are going to take. In our case, we decided right from the start, we want to be an ERIC. Harry convinced me, I think, with good arguments. And at that point, you will have this group leading the European project, and during the European project, you will have to think to the group leading the ERIC, in our case. Totally different governances. So at least you see we have one governance, the governance for the project. We plan and we think to another governance, the governance in year, in our case, 2021, for instance. And this makes two governances. In between, there is the transition phase. During the transition phase, your project is no more. The preparatory phase can, as Harry said, end before the ERIC is established. I think this is the most common case, I don't know. So you need to plan for a group leading the infrastructure during the transition phase. And this is a third governance. We just had this discussion in Warsaw, so I can report our case, and we established an interim governance on the scientific side. So the pleasurable part of that, as they are all volunteers, you don't have problems of money, but when you will be planning the governance for the ERIC, you need to take into account that a good governance needs to be paid. And so the decision on the governance will have immediate impact on the financial plan of your infrastructure. In the transition phase, luckily, is just a group of volunteers trying to lead through the valley of death, the infrastructure. And so we defined an executive committee, short, 5 people, an interim general director, and being a distributed infrastructure, we defined the National Interim Coordinators Committee, which is very important because in our reflection, the National Coordinators Committee will be the only international forum where to discuss things after the preparatory project is finished. We had I think I was simply lucky to establish right from the start of the preparatory phase, we renounced a scientific advisory board in favor of having a stakeholders advisory board, which proven to be very, very effective in helping us through the preparatory phase. In this moment, the stakeholders advisory board of IRIS is made by more than 20 ministry representatives. They are meeting periodically, reviewing documents, reviewing draft, giving advice. And so it's fundamental for quickening the pace of the preparation because you have a continuous contact with the ministries involved through their delegates. And it's also very important for negotiation because the same people can be the trait d'union with the ministers involved. Don't underestimate governance issues, is my message, especially because you don't know about the future. When we submitted to ESFRI, we were 12 countries. 2 years ago, we were in the roadmap with 12 countries. When we started the preparatory phase, 6 months after, 16 countries. Currently, we have 24 countries sending representatives to our meetings, including 5 non-EU members. So you see that the complexity of things can explode in 18 months. And so don't underestimate this issue because I came out from the 2016 meeting with this message, no governance, no sustainability. I think it's quite focused because someone should negotiate for the infrastructure. So you need to empower people to negotiate. So think having a real strong focused governance right from the start because it's fundamental. And please, if you are a distributed infrastructure, remember to empower your national coordinators to negotiate. I think it's all on my side.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for interactive questions, interactive session. A few questions from your part. Please, because we don't know everybody, don't forget to give your name and the project, the research infrastructure you're related to when you ask a question.
Hi, I will have a question for Luca.
And you are?
Ilaria Nardello, the Executive Director of EMBRC ERIC. I was wondering what is the difference between the stakeholder committee and your governance, like your General Assembly or your board?
We are running the project through governing board, standard like European projects, made of scientific people, so the scientists involved in the initiative. And
so you only have the scientists at the
governing board, yes, because we have mostly scientific representatives in the preparatory phase. We have 16 representatives of countries, practically speaking. We try to aggregate the national hubs, but you don't know where they will be when you start the preparation, so most of them, I think, at least. Then we have also 2 ERICs in the partnership. One is Serik Erik and one is Daria Erik. It's interesting because they can really help you. They already know the game, and so having them in the partnership could be very helpful. Also, we selected this Erik because they can have a future with IRIS, so it's not just a matter of having the preparation and then saying bye-bye. We can have really strong scientific cooperation. Finally, we had to put together three, but one was a duplicate, 3 members, 3 partners representing 3 scientific communities within the IRIS, digital archaeology, paleanthropology, and conservation restoration. So finally, the count of partners in the project is 20, but all scientific. But we have this counterpart, this body, which slowly, but not so slowly, filled. Laurence, by the way, is the representative of Belgium in this stakeholders advisory board. Perhaps we missed one advisory board which could have had a role. I put it to you. A user committee, a user advisory board would have been probably useful in our case, but that may have been a mistake. We will have it in the interim governance, for instance.
Okay, actrice, yeah.
Yes, so my name is Sanne Sorvari-Sundet. I'm coming from Actris. So the other project has been granted in 2016 and being now in the middle of the preparatory phase project. And I can really share the same views that about the governance, that my recommendation is also that please think that as one of your first deliverables that you will set it up in your project, that you are planning your governance really according to the different phases. As known, there will be the transitions happening, there will be a legal entity in place, and you would like to mimic the governance as soon as possible, your foreseen stable legal entity governance. So I fully agree that that's very important to recognize that there might be several types of governance happening in a very short time horizon. And therefore, when you think about it, please put it in a kind of a transitional time frame, that you can see that, okay, this body that I have now in the beginning of preparatory phase will translate to this in my legal entity. So that's also my fully the same recommendation. And of course, as said earlier by Harry, engage your contact points and national notes. That's extremely important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Carlos Alejandre. I'm from the IFMIF Dones project. I have a question for you, Harry. Hello, by the way. We have been told that for a project like IFMIF Dones, which is somehow related, even if it could be only as in-kind contribution from Euratom, cannot be an ERIC. Is that the case? And if it is not the case, and we can put an ERIC as, in principle, is what we would like to do. Can we include? You mentioned now that non-European cannot be there, so Japan cannot be in this ERIC?
Okay. First, on the nuclear question, we have one example, which is a Belgian project, well known by some, MIRA, where basically they prepared for becoming an ERIC, and they got into trouble with us, the European Commission, because you have in the Euratom Treaty some special provisions to establish a joint undertaking, like JET in the UK before it was. And our legal service was saying that because you have specific measures for nuclear activities there, you should use the Euratom Treaty, you cannot just use the ERIC. Now the problem with MIRA was that it really presented itself as a Generation 4 project. For IFMIF, if it doesn't limit itself to say, I want to do nuclear, but I want to look at materials in some extreme circumstances, and the angle is there, you can have an ERIC. It should just not be solely nuclear installation there like that. I think this is the first one. The second question about non-European members of ERICs, there are already some of them. I'm afraid that Switzerland is a non-European member in that sense, because it's not a member state, okay? What they need to do is, if they want to become full member, they need to recognize the ERIC regulation, and they need to recognize two things which they normally, well, one thing they really don't like, that is the competence of the European Court of Justice for dispute settlement within the ERIC. So, for example, the US would not go for it. Switzerland actually became member of only one ERIC till now, the spallation source, because they have to go through their parliament for this, just because of this competence jurisdiction story. We know that, for example, South Africa is looking at becoming member of JIVE ERIC. There's no issue there. The template for recognition of the ERIC is available. It's published on our website. It's very simple, but it implies that you also, as a non-EU state, give the equivalence of the VAT exemption. So they have to sort out how to do this. So we have two ERICs in Norway, also non-European in that sense, where they are a bit struggling about how to do this, and secondly, how this is done also in the Union on a reciprocal basis. But these are details. So in principle, coming back, nuclear, totally nuclear, no. Euratom, if you give it another angle, you can make a convincing case. Yes, you can have an ERIC. European, non-European, it depends on whether you want to have them as members. If you want to need them as members, it complicates life in certain cases. For some other countries, it doesn't make too much difference.
Okay. For Mira, just for your information, we first go to the AESBL, but since the activities of Mira are a bit better defined now, I keep in mind that AESBL might be a transitional legal entity.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, Joaquin Sanchez, also from IFMIF Donors. Hello, Harry. I would like to ask, you told us about the governance structure, but I would like to know about the decision-making system. So I guess you have some voting rights in your board or whatever. I mean, and probably you would like to have decisions by consensus, but the underlying voting rights sometimes help to produce this consensus. So maybe you can tell us.
Yeah, I can give the example of what we have. We have, and also this is also an answer to the previous discussion. In EPOS, the governance body has always been the same decided since the beginning of the preparatory phase. We engage the national authorities and we form a board of national governmental representatives. And we had 24 countries that nominated a person. The point is that this person should not be scientist. Okay, in this board, you don't need a scientist with a proxy, a delegate. We need a representative of the ministries because they need to negotiate with the national road mapping and prioritization. Therefore, in this board, when we started with ERIC, this board now in November, they will go into the General Assembly. So we have a single board, but in the General Assembly, we have 2 delegates plus advisor, one with political and ministerial commitments, and another with the scientific commitments. Therefore, the national team is able to discuss both the scientific and the strategic and political. 1 member, 1 vote. So this means that there are 2 people, the delegation plus experts, and up to 4 people, but there is 1 single vote per 1 single country. If you wish, we can discuss the way in which voting is scheduled with the membership fees, which is another tricky, but maybe, in any case, I can only tell you that institutes, we have a formula, a mathematical formula to manage this in a legal document.
I am rather fresh on this because we discussed it right last week. Minutes are not around, but if I remember the orientation, we were oriented to give for the General Assembly the opportunity for each ministry to appoint 2 delegates, but of course 1 will attend to the meetings. In our case, it's 1 head, 1 vote, no weighting mechanism, a simple majority, qualified majority, no unanimity. You can correct me if you remember different things than me. And delegates, technical delegates can be taken to the General Assembly. Usually the member takes the national coordinator plus 1-2 technical advisors. So that is where we are oriented because we are planning.
Okay, thank you. A last question for this session, sorry. Keep your question for later, for the last general session. Disco, yeah?
Yeah, Dimitris Krias, coordinator of DISCO. DISCO entered just the 2018 roadmap. And I would like to ask you, we entered the roadmap with a very elaborate, already agreed upon governance model for both the preparatory phase and the transition phase and the potential operational phase. So my question to you is, do you think that is worth bringing forward the establishment of the legal entity within the duration of the preparatory phase, from your experience and your advice that you can give to us? Or do you think the organization can benefit from a more loosely based approach during the PPP before we actually embark onto the more legally binding enterprises?
Okay, I think if you're mature enough, which you seem to be in terms of preparation already, you don't want to lose time. I mean, one of the biggest threats in preparatory phase and also the phase afterwards is that you lose momentum. So if you have established political support already about the way you go, the way you want to do it, and you think you can do it in 2 years, you do it in 2 years, I would recommend. There's no way why you need to have 4 years of soul searching where you already found it. So this is one. The second thing is that if you can use the momentum to do it in 2-3 years, you can use the time within the preparatory phase. You can shorten it if you wish, but you can also redirect a little bit your activities where you have your points which you think should be further developed, like services or other things. And I would recommend to do that. If you're mature enough, nobody will question this.
Can I just add a comment on
Yes,
this?
please, Massimo.
I think that this is also depends of the perimeter of the ERIC, of the governance body. Because if you have a lot of service provision, which is not part of the ERIC, but they sign a service contract for being in charge, in this case, I think that you need to have the eligibility of those services. Therefore, at least for EPOS, in which we intentionally decided the legal seat during the preparatory phase and the ERIC establishment during the implementation phase. And one lesson that we learned, when you have a project and you have the ERIC, you need to have a very effective mechanism to transfer the achievements of the project to the ERIC, with its own decision body. And second, when you enter with the projects where we have, in our case, 23 countries, and we go to the ERIC, they do not sign all together. Therefore, you have the first General Assembly will have only 12 countries out of 22. And therefore, this transition has to be managed. Therefore, the decision is also strategic to the timeline of your delivery framework, not only the governance and the legal.
Shortest possible comment to my friend Dimitris. My advice, don't tell the Commission you are already set everything. You are about to ask 4 million for your preparatory phase. End of the comment.
Okay. Thank you. Just a last thing before we close this session. I would like our speakers to tell you a final message in a few words, like a slogan. What would be your message?
The message is that even if we are mostly scientists and we tackle this management and governance part with like a nightmare, I think that at the very end it is the crucial part of working and operating a research infrastructure. So be patient. In the long term it will be fun, but at the beginning it will not.
Harry, a few words?
I'm just
a
simple bureaucrat, so in that sense,
So
I would say be optimist and see this as opportunities instead of, and seriously, not just as risk and things it seems to be a nightmare as a process. Sometimes it is actually, but most times things work out. So the only thing I have as a message is, when you sign your grant agreement, see it really as the opportunity to get your boost and take that really forward.
And Luca?
Be brave.
So,
It will be a tough period. My message is just for coordinator of new infrastructures. The others already know. So it will be a tough period. It's a full-time job. That is my message.
so the conclusion, be patient, be optimistic, be brave. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you very much for this very lively and interesting first panel about governance. And before we will now move to the next panel, we will have a short coffee break where you can intensify the discussion. Thank you very much.